What's the crack, everybody? Uh, I was kind of thinking, well, the last night I was going to do this here, and I kind of got sidetracked at it. I hope you're all well, by the way. The green room's here, not so bad. I only got to listen to a little bit of your thing because I was flicking through a book. Oh, I'm getting feedback here somehow. Oh, the green room's here, not so bad. I only got to listen. Problem solved, I think. Sorry there. Yeah, I was getting feedback in the headphone. Yeah, I was thinking about, well, last week it kind of popped into my head was like, the Irish monks that travel across Europe. I hope, can you hear me all right? Maybe you can let me know. I'll probably talk about, I might make reference to what happened during the week, but it's, at this stage, like, we got what we needed anyway. Off 5x5, good man, or woman, or whatever. Yeah, sorry, a bit thrown off here. I've had my head stuck in a book like for the last 2 hours. Started reading up on different things. I found references by a guy O'Curry, who's like a great historian, like a translator for ancient Irish works. Between him and John O'Donovan, they translated the ancient laws of Ireland, but they translated anything they could get their hands on. Like, so I was just kind of going to go through like pagan Ireland, and it's kind of like that. It's not really like just the 4chan meme, like of people like, if we just get rid of the church and if we toss everything out, like, it'd be way better. But I wouldn't really put. There's probably some arguments like for repealing different things, like in the church or whatever. But overall, it's up until the last century, it was generally a good thing. Not always great for us, like, but yourself, the lesser of two evils kind of thing. And there's a lot of good thrown in with it too. But I just thought I'd go through kind of like the pagan setup of the country. Oh man, I know bother. How do you pronounce that? I call you Ulpo. Right. Anyways, yeah, like I suppose you can start off with the Shanachas more, like, because that was basically the point where Ireland became Christianized, like, and like the reason for it being written was that St. Patrick had travelled Ireland. Obviously, he had 30 or so followers with him, and he was actually living in Auxerre before he came here because his uncle was an abbot running a monastery over there, and that's where he trained, as a monk, like, and he went to the Pope in Rome and said, I want to go back to Ireland. Like, this is after his Ashling, like his dream where he's, whenever he was like, he heard the voice of God whenever he was living in Antrim or whatever as a slave or, a cow herder. And he decided to fulfill what he thought, what he heard. And he went to the Pope anyway. And the Pope granted him. He said, yeah, you can lead a mission to Ireland. So him and 30 of his followers, they went up through Italy up through France, like to Brittany today. They sailed across into Cornwall, and then they went up as far as Gloucester and sailed across into Ireland. But one of the first major things that happened to St. Patrick, one of the first things that happened with St. Patrick, whenever that was of note to the Gael, was that there was a festival going on the Hill of Tara, and if you're ever up there, you can kind of you can see a hell of a lot of the country from around it. But the festival included a Druidic tradition, which was that a fire be lit on the Hill of Tara, and every other fire in the country be lit from that fire. So that was you hear of people lighting the fires on hilltops all around. So the Druids would do their bit with the chieftain or the chieftains. It was actually the King of Ireland, Leary, was there at the time. His grandson and Niall of the 9 hostages, who actually, kidnapped St. Patrick. But they were doing their little, their ceremony to light this fire. And St. Patrick and his followers, they were on the Hill of Ishnach, and they lit a fire of their own. And everyone was like outraged that this was completely unallowed. Like, and St. Patrick, anyway, we went up to the leaders, like, and King Leary, he said to his men, whoever kills this guy, because he had heard of Patrick land in the country. He said, whoever kills this guy, I'll give them a load of treasure, like, and a couple of wishes, you know, just to see what this all forgiven man from this forgiven religion, what he does. And it was then Leary actually had one of his brothers enslaved, would be the word I'd use, but, you know, it wasn't exactly chains and whips kind of thing, but bound to his brother, basically. And he said, yeah, he's like, give me a horse and a spear and I'll wreck one of them. And I was grand. He rode down the hill anyway, and he fired a spear at Oran, Patrick's charioteer, and killed him. And King Leary obviously wanted to see what had happened. St. Patrick, he got down on the ground and started praying over his charioteer. And I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the chat here. St. Patrick got cancelled. Yeah, we had a good old St. Patrick's Day up here anyway. I don't know what the rest is, but I know the pubs being shut were a kind of a godsend. Pardon the pun. But yeah, so basically St. Patrick flew into a rage after his charioteer was killed. Like, he prayed over him, went into this rage, and like the sky went all twisted and warped. The ground started shaking around Tara. And everyone, like the kings and the chieftains that had gathered, were like, oh, like, we have pissed something supernatural off here. So they went up. St. Patrick marched up to the top of the hill, and he was like, I want satisfaction, basically. I want something done about what yous are after doing. And they were like, right, well, since you're a foreigner, we'll let you pick anybody that you want, because the tradition at the time was that if you were from, say, Dublin, and you fell out with someone from Dublin, you had to get someone from Dublin to judge it, you know. But if you were in, you know, from Dublin and someone done something to you in Cork, you had to pick someone in Munster, you know, to judge the situation, like. And so anyways, then St. Patrick was like, St. Patrick said, getting distracted here. Someone outside the window. Yeah. Anyways, St. Patrick. Sorry about that. I'm a bit distracted here at the minute. I'm settling in gradually. I'll get to the point. But where was I now? St. Patrick said, oh yeah, he chose a guy called Dovtuck, and Dovtuck was the Ardolo, like the chief poet of Ireland at the time, and said, you decide what happened or what happens now, like, for to fix this. So Dovtuck, he was kind of like, Jesus, I'm kind of between a rock and a hard place here. He's like, I can't piss the king off, but he's like, I'm after seeing the power that Patrick has shaking the ground and all, so I don't really want to mess with him either. And he kind of had a general understanding of what Christians were about, like, because I probably have to go. I suppose this is as good a place to start as any, really, with the story, because it goes back to like the time of Moses, basically. And the fall of Egypt. But before St. Patrick came to Ireland, we still operated under the Old Testament law, you know, an eye for an eye, which was, you know, didn't really work for the Irish at that point, because we had fallen into multiple civil wars amongst the different Gaelic tribes in the country, and it was coming to no resolution. We were just basically killing each other and handing gold to each other. And the chieftains that were gathered there, they wanted a resolution to this too. So anyways, then Dovtuck, what he said was, right, I actually have it written down here. I won't read the whole thing, like, but I'll just maybe read a little bit of a snippet of it. But, you know, us Irish, like, we were great at actually writing this stuff down, like, so it's amazing. But this is what Dovtuck said. He goes, hear me, O God, direct my path. The oldest fathers, the fathers of potent knowledge, perverted not the judgments of the Lord, that I may not heap aggravation upon the bloody crimes of men. The truth of the Lord may it help me with the testimony of the new law. In the world I decree it, divine knowledge I confess, to which veneration is due, that each man for his crime shall depart unto death. The two laws indeed contain examples of vengeance. By my cheeks, which is like a phrase for I'm telling the truth, like, that I shall not stain their white honour. I pass a sound judgment. I follow Patrick since my baptism. That was Dovtuck basically admitting that, yeah, Patrick has a point here after he had argued it. And he goes on then basically to say that you know, God does not vouchsafe mercy. That you know, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime, basically. But that if you kill someone, you deserve to die for it. which was kind of topical with what's going on at the minute. But it goes, "It is evil to kill by a foul deed. I pronounce the judgment of death for his crime to everyone he kills." Nuada was the name of the guy that killed Patrick's charioteer. Nuada is judged to heaven and is not to death. He is judged, but he was put to death. He was forgiven by St. Patrick, and he was put to death. So that way, St. Patrick managed to bring Christian teaching of forgiveness into a Gaelic context and show people how it was practical. Whereas beforehand it would have been, "Oh, well, you're after killing my guy, so I'm going to kill your guy." And then they would have went, "Well, you're after killing our guy, so we're going to kill you." It was like, it had fallen apart, which is kind of like a big reason why I'm kind of like, you hear people talking about neo-pagans and all this kind of stuff. And I'll get into details about it, but it just fucking grinds my gears, tell you the truth. It's like we gave it up 2,000 years ago, or 1,500 years ago anyway, because it didn't work. It's cool and all, and there's some like cool little aspects to it, but we kind of developed it, so I'll go back, I suppose, to where the Gaelic law, the Brehon law that St. Patrick basically rewrote the rule book on, where it came from. It's in the Shanachas More as well. It describes it. It's you all have heard of the Tower of Babel, and the Tower of Babel in an Irish context was that there was, generally you have me two she, shun she in Irish. There was also an extra two, which were basically like ye, like the last ye or whatever, she, but they were gendered, so there was a male and female she, and so there was 9 kind of whatever you call them tenses. I'm not a grammarian, I don't know the technical terms of this, and but basically there was 9 building materials of the, traditionally there was 9 building materials of the Tower of Babel, and that was how people learned language, the Gaelic language. Because Gael Glass obviously invented, our mythology is that Gael Glass invented the Gaelic language, that it was this perfect language that was created from the other 72 languages in the world that was created at the Tower of Babel. And he was Gael Glass. He was born in southwest Egypt, the plain of Ucca. There's a great book. It's called The Scholar's Primer, or Sipnaska or something it's called. But it goes through the Gaelic language. How come words never start with ng, and why did they never end in f and stuff? It goes through the whole lot. It was basically, if you wanted to be a Brehon, that was the Scholar's Primer was the first thing you learned. And back in Brehon times, say St. Patrick now, with the whenever he rewrote all these rules that had developed from the time of Gael Glass up to the time of St. Patrick arriving. It was written in a thing called Berla Féini. Berla Féini was the old, it was the, you think of Irish today versus Old Irish. Well, from Old Irish to Berla Féini, it's the same. It was an ancient language, Féini, the Fenians, the Phoenicians. It was a very primitive version of Irish, back whenever we were still, as they say, living in the Middle East, as the Scythians. And it was basically what happened after Gael Glass created his language, was that his grandson, who was called Sru, if I remember correctly, Sru was the leader of the Gaelic people at the time. And obviously, a lot of us was living in Egypt because we had moved there. Phineas Farside's son, Nell, had married an Egyptian princess, and that's, Gael Glass's parents, basically. And Gael Glass's grandson, he was in charge at the time when King Chris, his name is, who is probably Akhenaten the Fourth in modern parlance, whenever he tried to change Egypt into a monotheistic country, which led to a massive disaster. And there's always this scholarly debate about, who was the pharaoh that got drowned in the Red Sea and all whenever the Israelites were leaving. But logic dictates, if you follow Irish mythology, it was Akhenaten the Fourth, and it makes sense too, because they recently, he was 18th dynasty in Egypt, and he was M269, which is Western European. You know, the same as what Ireland, Western Scotland, and Brittany, and the Celtic parts of Europe basically are like 99. Well, up until about 2000, were like 98% M269. Like, whereas they're wiped out in Egypt today, because we all fled basically whenever Egypt collapsed, and whenever we fled, we fled into different groups. Like, we didn't all come together. A large majority went with Sru, grandson of Gaelic Glass, and they landed in Greece. And from Greece, they went up to Ukraine, up by the river Tanish. I always thought that was interesting. Like, because you have the River Don on one side and the River Tanish on the other. Like the Tanish, the secondary river. But yeah, basically after that, then we sailed to Malta, and from Malta to Spain, and that's whenever you get into the Milesian history of Ireland, But obviously, whenever we landed in Malta, or before we landed in Malta, there was groups breaking off all the time. And one of them became the whatchamacallums, the Fir Bolg. They went up through Belgium, became the Belgic tribes. But one fella that didn't come, he was actually a Hebrew. He was an Israelite by descendant of the Israelites. His name was Kai Cainbrachta. And Kai was the first Brehon. He followed Moses whenever Egypt collapsed, but he didn't stay with him for 40 years, like until they got to the Promised Land. Instead, he sailed off to Thrace. And Thrace, there's a place just beside Thrace in Greece. It's called Mygdonia. That's where the Partholonians are from. The first people that settled Ireland, like semi-permanently, landed in Ballyshannon, a place called Inishamer. And there's a lot of mythology about them, but the Gaelic law, like the first traditions that started to build up that were historically or mythologically said to be brought by the Partholonians. They sheltered in a place called Shan Megadder, the old treeless plain or whatever it was called. It's a forestry now outside the town, but they brought in traditions such as rules about brewing beer, keeping cattle, and being hospitable to people. And what's a Hebrew? A male teabag. That's actually a good one. The Partholonians, and obviously, like there's loads of place names that are attributed to the Partholonians all over the country, really. There'll be a place in Leitrim is called Glenade. It's the Valley of Jealousy, because Partholon, his wife, was away drinking wine that belonged to him, basically, with one of her servants, and Partholon flew into a rage and killed the servant in jealousy, like in Glenade. And that's when the first law in Ireland was dictated. It was I can't remember the full text of it now, like, but it's basically along the lines of no help from God to man or beast that slays one of their own kith and kin. So it was that you weren't allowed to kill anyone in your own tribe. Was the first law made in Ireland, which kind of makes a little bit of sense, at least. But all these things built up, obviously, over how long's a piece of string, until St. Patrick came and basically straightened out the whole devil worship thing, like, because there was, like, people, like, I don't want to get too philosophical about it, like, but there used to be a thing in Ireland, and the great thing about Irish, like, Druidism and paganism, is that we have our own records of this. Like, if you listen to, like, anyone that remembers school, I know I barely do, like, but I remember the only thing that we learned about Druidism in the Irish school system was that the only thing that survives left of them was something that Julius Caesar wrote. That's the only mention anywhere, which is a blatant lie. Like, it's the Eugene O'Curry translated old texts and took any of the references to Druidism and the old religion, we'll call it. He has translated, like, And there's differences between the Gaelic Celts and the Gaelic Celts. Like there's huge differences. Like, and this is just some of the examples. Like the Gaelic Celts that Julius Caesar was on about, they had like a kind of a pope, basically. Ireland didn't really have that. What we had was when a king became, or if we had a high king or whatever, he could pick a druid. You know, like he would have a druid as his like confidant and someone to give him advice and to kind of be like, you know, tell him the future, basically. Like, oh, what if I do this? What if I do that? You know. Whereas in Gaul, it was like a separate class. It was like its own little hierarchy, you know, where you had a supreme leader of the Gaelic the Gaelic Druids. Like there was from Curry as well. Like, and I'm taking Curry's word in this because I reckon he's dead a long time. He actually got murdered in Sligo, but in the 1700s or something. But his the amount of translation and work that he put into this over his lifetime is absolutely stunning. Like Eugene O'Curry, like, you know, just anytime you see a book with Eugene O'Curry on it, it's probably a big old dusty tome. Like, just get that book and keep it, like, because that is a valuable document. Like, but he was basically going into the technicalities of the. Let's see this there. Didn't Druidism originate in Ireland, Britain? Yeah, like this is the thing. Like, but I might get into that at the end. I'll keep rattling about this here, like, because I'll just keep going between the Gaelic Druids and the Gaelic Druids. The Gaelic Druid, I'll just call them French and Irish, right? It's a bit easier. The French Druids believed that the human soul was immortal, that whenever a man died, his soul was transferred into like a new baby or whatever, you know? Whereas the Irish didn't believe that. And that's why you have so many pagan place names are people. Like, well, I can't even think of an example on the spot, like, but you know what I mean? Like, there's loads of places, you know, that's named after, like, what do you call that? Oh, I can't even fucking think. Oh, before, here's an example, Slania. Slieve Donard, which is the highest mountain in Ulster, its name before St. Patrick came was Slieve Slania. And that was because there's this thing in Irish, the Dinshankus. I can't even pronounce that properly. Dinshankus, I'll have to do right. But it's basically, how did places get their names? And the tradition in the Druid sense was that once someone died, their soul didn't have to be transferred directly into a different human body, that it could take place, that it could like reside as like a spirit in a rock or in a place or in a river, you know, that kind of way. That it was that we were these constant flowing life forms, basically, you know. And the Gaels believed, the Irish believed, that the human soul was this kind of like more liquid, whereas the Gauls were more kind of like, no, it's a one for one, you know. The Gauls also had human sacrifice, but the Irish, there's never been any reference in our native in our native records that the Irish Druids ever had human sacrifice, like, and they weren't really connected in much of a way, like, more than kind of just nearly the tradition. Like even in Irish, the old name for Druid, right? People always say it's Druid. It's not, though. Like, there's no reference to any Druids anywhere. It's Corganach was the name of Druids in Irish. I go through a couple of things anyway. The French Druids did not write anything down ever. It was against their belief or whatever that you were allowed to write down any of this stuff, whereas the Irish did, which is where Ogham comes in. That even now, like on tree branches, like, you know, they'd write Ogham on tree branches and they'd use that for divination, you know, like it's like rolling the bones or something, you know. And like the French, you know, like, this is something that's kind of like a pet peeve of mine, but the oak tree was not like a massively important tree to Irish Druids. That was a French thing. The Irish Druids, the hazel and the yew tree were far more important. Like the oak was kind of like a kind of a, you know, whatever. Like Ireland was whatever, how much oak forestry at the time. But yew were kind of like special, and hazel obviously, like it was kind of seen as the tree of light, you know, as opposed to holly, which was the tree of darkness. And the even by the way they worshipped, like the Irish Druids, they weren't like nearly like priests or something, you know. They didn't really have rituals. They didn't have temples. Well, I suppose they would have had rituals, but they didn't really have temples or a kind of a strict code of conduct or any of this kind of stuff. Whereas the French did. That was the big, like the main difference was that, say, you know, 2,000 years ago, if you think of a philosopher or a poet or a historian or any of this kind of stuff, they would have all gone into this bracket of Corganach, which is, you know, Druid in the French term. Like, there used to be people, well, according to the mythology, there was people called Fomorians. Balor of the Evil Eye was one of them. They used to live on Tory Island in the Glass Tower. And if you read any of the old books about them, like they come ashore with one leg, one arm, and one eye. And I used to always get confused about this here, you know, growing up, like, because that was one of the main things, that they were half people, like, you know. And it used to confuse the hell out of me, like, because I didn't understand, because Balor had two arms and two legs, but he had one eye, all right, like. But Lou, his grandson, had two legs, two arms, and two eyes, like, you know. And I used to just could never piece together what that meant, like. But then I was reading this thing, and I was looking for the Irish word for it, and I can't find the proper Irish word, but there's a thing called a glam, which is basically, or a glom, which would basically be like a curse that the Druids would incant, you know. And what they used to do whenever they were making these gloms, like, was stand on one leg, put one arm in the air, and close one eye, and then they'd start hollering out these incantations. You know, and there's even up until, I think it was in like the 1700s on Tory Island, there's like a local legend, was that the English were sailing across to the island, and the locals all started chanting at the sea. And the next thing then, a storm whipped up, and the boat hit a rock. The British boat hit a rock and killed a whole lot of them. Like, they had a tiny beehive. They copied books all day, the monks. Oh yeah, oh sure. I'd really go back to it at this stage, the way things are going, tell you the truth. But yeah, there used to be different kind of like prostrations and stuff that the Druids used to do. Like the one leg, one eye, and one hand was one of them. There was another one where, to insult someone or to, like, you know, make a fool out of them, they used to get down on their hands and knees and crawl backwards. And I find that interesting because King Mahan, who was one of the O'Brien tribes or whatever, or kings, whenever he, like, about, what was this, the year 960 or whatever, there was the Vikings of Limerick and the Irish went to war against each other, and the Irish kicked the head of the Vikings. And what King Mahan made the women do, like, obviously he didn't slaughter the Viking women, wasn't the done thing at the time. What he made them do was he made them line up on hilltops all around the battlefield after it was finished, and then get down on all fours and crawl backwards for their pagan dead. You know, it was like the ultimate insult from a Gaelic perspective, like, that they were basically sticking their arses up in the air to their husbands and sons and all this kind of crack. Like, you know, there was no love lost at all, like, obviously. There used to be a thing as well, the St. Patrick actually outlawed this, was that whenever a Brehon was making a judgment, or a Druid, whatever you want to call them, that they used to tap a stick on the ground, which was common even in Greece whenever their judges used to do, or whenever they were making a decision, because they used to do it in rhyme a lot of the time. Like, you know, that's where you get, like, the old shannuckle, like, you know, a bird in the bush, we're two in the hand, you know. And a lot of these things, them shannuckles stick around because they have a what you call it, a kind of a a rhythm to it, or a poetry to it, like that kind of makes it stick out a bit. But it was the same in Irish, like, it was all a lot of play on words and stuff. Captain Teeling says, in Kilo's graveyard there is a cursing stone. Have to put your hand through a hole in the large stone. We'll show you sometime. Oh geez, yeah. I was actually there used to be a thing. It was boundaries. There was a Roman god, right, called Terminus, and what Terminus was he was the god of boundaries, basically. And it was tradition in Rome and Ireland that at the end of like your property, people would put up stones and dedicate them to these kind of like gods or whatever. The terminus was the kind of go-to for Rome, like, that you don't cross terminus kind of thing. But what's this? What's spell words? Ulpa or Ulpo? I call you Ulpa. It's just easier to say. Well, he's wrong about Sligo. I'll tell you. Where is that place? It's in. Oh God, I actually wrote this down because I'm terrible with place names. Well, actually, I have a good story to tell you about that. Oh, Screen in Sligo. There was a guy before King Leary, who was the guy whenever St. Patrick was King of Ireland. Dahi was his name. He was up in Screen. He used to have like a kind of a summer residence up there. And he said to his druid, it was on Halloween, and he said to his druid, he's like, tell me what my reign will be like for the next year, like. And the druid was like, yeah, no problem. And the druid went up to a hilltop it's still to this day called Druid's Hill in Screen. He went up on top and he sat down, and he went up at sunset, and he came back down just after sunrise. And he goes, greetings to the King of Ireland and the King of Alba. And Dahi was like, why are you calling me the King of Alba? And he's like, in the next 12 months, you'll be the King of Scotland. Like, and that's when Dahi then he launched a big campaign against Scotland and Western Britain. And he actually landed in Brittany at some point as well. But that was the advice, like, that was divination from the clouds. I think that's a class. Like, it's like it kind of gets into the crux of what a druid was. It was like a natural philosopher, nearly, like, But they used to use you still see it in places like, deepest darkest Africa and places in India and stuff, where they'd like cut open a goat and look at its liver to see what's the weather going to be like, kind of thing. But what was I even on about there? I kind of got distracted halfway through. There was a battle between the Northern O'Neills and the Southern O'Neills, and the Southern O'Neills, they were led by a guy called Dermot, I think, King Dermot, I think, yeah. And there was this here druid called Freehan or Feehan or something, and King Dermot was like, oh, put up this thing, it's called a druid's wall. And it was like, used to be this incantation where the druid walked around an area, chanting spells and stuff like that. And it was just the druid's wall, I think. Yeah, the druid's knot was another term for it. It kind of depends, like wall or knot or druid's fence. But anyways, it was this kind of like barrier that you weren't allowed to cross, And like they used to put them up outside hill forts and stuff like that as well. It was like sanctified nearly. But what happened was one of the Northern O'Neill's troops called MacLav, he charged and ran in, broke through this druid's knot that had been cast, and he got killed stone dead in the spot. But that was enough to like break the spell that the druid had placed over. Like, and this was only, if you think about it, this was only fucking like 1300 years ago. Like, it's not like, it's like what exactly are they talking about here? But anyways, he broke the spell anyway, and the Northern O'Neill army crashed into the Southern O'Neill army. And that day then, as it's recorded, is that the Southern O'Neills, they lost 3,000 men in that fight, and the only man that died for the Northern O'Neills was the fella that crashed through at the very beginning. It's a I like that story, and I tell you the truth. Like, but there used to be this here thing, but this was before St. Patrick. There used to be, like, say, the Druid class. The Druid class were kind of a go-to of the learned fellas, you know, like whatever you needed done that needed knowledge and information, you went to the whatever you may call him, the Druid, and he kind of sorted it out for you. But there was this divergence, like that basically they were using this old ancient language with really highly technical terms and all this kind of stuff passed down, and the problem was that people couldn't actually understand what the hell they were talking about at this stage. Like, you know, it could have been something that seemed simple, like, but it just had so many technicalities and traditions and all attached to it that it was just impossible for a normal person to follow what was going on. And this happened to King Conor MacArch in our mythology anyway. He was listening to these two druids. There was a guy called Fernach or something, and Neha. They were arguing away, and this went on for days, like, and nobody knew what the hell they were arguing about, but they were both adamant, like. So right then and there, King Cormac, he decided, right, I'm changing the rules. He's like, anyone can be a Brahmin as long as they're smart enough to fucking do the job, because it was Druids were ancient traitors. It's like the ancient mystery of the Q, you know. It's like, why does home have a Q and not a whatever P and a P letter in it? But basically Conor MacArch, he just got rid of the rule that only poets and druids or whatever could be Brahmins, like, and that was like one of the, like, Conor MacArch, he was basically like I don't know, he was the hero. You know, everything, like, he was the greatest probably king we ever had in history of the Irish nation, like, you know, at least according to the mythology, like, and he kind of agree with it. Like, if you ever go up to his grave, he's buried in a place called Keshcarn in Ballymote in Sligo, and it's a class spot. Like, there's like 17 cave entrances beside each other on the side of this hill, you know. It's a big steep climb up. Well, it's not too big, like, but it's a steep climb up to it. And then there's like a place where, like, this massive cave complex, you know. And then up on top, there's a cairn, and that's the grave of Conor MacArch. But then you're like basically just at eye level looking across a Queen Maid's grave, which is like one of the oldest in Western Europe. I think it's only, there's like one in Brittany or something of standing stones that's older, like, but other than that, like, Queen Maid's is one of the oldest in Ireland anyway. But did I mention the heathen baptism thing that was the Druids used to do? They used to chant over a child, and they'd basically, like, they'd be like, oh, you're going to be the greatest foe of, you know, if someone was pissing the parents off, to be like, oh, you're going to be the bane of that man, you know, or that woman. You're gonna make their life a fucking hell on earth. Like, that was the devil's baptism, as they call it. Like, you know, you're raised from birth to be a fucking arsehole, basically. Like, but that was only preserved for, like, kings and stuff like that for the most part, like, or people that had been really pissed off, you know. But there's like, even then following on, like, there's so much tied up between pre St. Patrick and post St. Patrick. Like St. Patrick basically came in after a lot of this stuff had been degraded down to damn near nothing, like, you know, because we had a revolution in this country in a year around the year 100 or 200 AD, just after King Conor MacArch, like, well, following that timeline anyway. But at the time we had the Tuatha Danann and the Firbolg living in the west of Ireland, and then we had the Milesians, which would be like who was the Gaelic kings of, you know, all the ancestors of Brian Boru and Red Hugh O'Neill and all them boys. They were all kind of living in most of the country, 3 of the provinces, or 4 of the provinces if you include Meath, like. But there was this here slave class, basically. They'd been degraded. Like, the Milesians landed, they were living in Spain at the time, and they came on a trading mission, and there was one of them called It, and It was the brother of the king. There's actually a statue in Spain today of its father, Brogan. Brogan's Tower was Braganza was the capital of the Gaelic city in northern Spain. But anyways, they were on a trading mission to Ireland, and it was killed by one of the two-headed Danann. The two-headed Danann, they had three kings at the time, McCool, McKecht, and Magrina, and their three wives were Era, Bamba, and Folla. And it was killed anyway, and the Milesians left, and they were like, right, boys, load up the boats, we're fucking taking this place. The Pisties wiped these hoors out, like. So they landed anyway, and the two-headed Danann, they were like casting spells out into the sea and all this kind of crack, like trying to drive the Milesians back out. But they landed, and there was a couple of battles, and the Milesians took over and drove the Firbolg and the two-headed Danann out to the Connacht, basically, like probably like the Cage of Fields, I'd say, around that area. But there was a revolt then, about whatever 1900 years ago, and the Milesians were nearly wiped out. Like that, their slaves, like their servants, had been working against them under the leadership of a guy called Carbra King Catch, the Cathir Charioteer, his name was. And they went around poisoning and stabbing all the Milesian kings and chiefs at a dinner or like a big festival. That threw the whole country into fucking turmoil, obviously. Like, and we had barely recovered from that when St. Patrick had arrived. Like, the way we were rowing and kicking the crap out of each other constantly, like, and that's why everyone was kind of like, holy shit, we can actually solve this problem, But the end of the two-headed Danann, where they finish off, is actually with a guy, Manaman MacLear. He was all here, the children of Lear. Manaman MacLear was Lear's son. He was the god of the sea. And he gave the two-headed Danann permission to go below the earth and under lakes and to live there in with the She underground. And like people always think, like, well, I don't know, people have chatted to this about, they always think the two-headed Danann are the She, like the original She fairies, like. But the thing was that there was She already there underground whenever the two-headed Danann got there, and it says that in the oldest records of the oldest copies of the what you call that, Mesh Golu, the drunkenness of the Ulster men or whatever, Cuchulainn protected, the Táin, basically, from the Táin. And there was already people there, like, so it kind of gets down to the point of it's like there used to be a Asaro is the old name for the river that goes through Ballyshannon. Well, the waterfalls there, it's still called Asaro today, like, but it, like, Ballyshannon itself was just kind of Asaro, the waterfalls of the red waterfalls, the waterfalls red hue or whatever. But before it was called the waterfalls, or the waterfall red hue, it was called the dark waterfall, like Asa Dun. And who was Dun? Dun was the god of the underworld. He was like Hades. Like, and I've heard different versions. Like, I'm kind of going into what people have been telling me now. Like, but I've heard versions from Welsh fellas who weren't full of dung. Definitely not. Like, they definitely knew their history and stuff. But they were going through what they have in their tradition. Like, that's kind of survived. That fills in a lot of our gaps. But that basically it goes back to the Gaelic creation myth, like, the pre-Christian myth. But it goes that Dun was the Hades or whatever. Like, his Hades was called Teach Dún. So it was Dun's house, the dark house underground, And there was this like island out on a lake with a big fire going on it and a pot over the fire. And basically, after you died, you were dumped into this lake and you had to swim towards the island. And once you got onto the island, then all your family and friends and relations that had already died were sitting on this island, but there seems to be like some kind of common thread among European pagans at the time, like that there was like a nearly like a, what would you call it, like an existential problem with that, in that at what point does Chalk Dun get full? You know, when is the island too full of people? Like, you know, and that was like one of the reasons why St. Patrick was accepted so much as well. Like, you know, was that because there was heaven and hell and rebirth and infinite, you know, like these kind of concepts were brought to the fore. Like, you know, like it's not just on a religious level that things changed. Like it was nearly like on a psychological level. This opened up whole new doors, like, you know, for reason and logic in the country. Like, but yeah, I'd really talk about the Gaelic creation myth, but it's kind of like it's not it wouldn't be widely accepted. Definitely not in out of the people that I know anyway. They'd be like, nah. It's basically like at the beginning of the world, you had brown and blue, and they were two colors that like that God was like at the beginning. There's this one thing, and he split in two because he wanted to see himself, and one part of him became blue, and the other bit became brown, you know, or dark red, and they started swirling together, like, and that's how you ended up with physical reality. That's the shortened version of it, like, because the version I heard went on for about 2 hours, like, but it was an interesting story all the same. Whether it's a pile of shit or not, I don't know. But the even then, like, when you think of, like, say, the Shanachas Mór, the way it's written is like a story. It's kind of like really, obviously put together a lot better, but it's kind of like a ramble. You know, like there's a lot of the Shanachas Mór just cuts off halfway through a sentence and starts talking about something else. What's this? Didn't they speak the same tongue? Yeah, they were all Gaels. Are you know about the two-headed Annan and the Furbolg? Like the Malaysians, the two-headed Annan and the Furbolg, they were all Gaelic people. Like it was just that there were different branches. They separated off. Like that's why the Shanachas Mór is in Burlafeni, you know, the Fenian language, like, because we were all descended from Phineas Farside, like, so that was how it was decided. Like it was kind of like the common tongue. But by the time St. Patrick got here, Burlafeni, like the ancient Irish language, it had kind of fallen into disrepair. You know, it'd be like a modern. I've said this already, but it's interesting to try and read the annals of the Four Masters or whatever. You know, just the Irish of it, because you can nearly put it together. Do you know, all the none of the spellings are standardized or nothing like that, but there's, you know, differences in grammar as well, like, you know, that have been standardized and changed over, you know, 400 years or whatever. But like if you take that to another notch that is barely comprehensible, that's what the Shanachas Mór was written in, you know. So you basically had 20 years. That was the tradition, and it took 20 years to become a Brehon, like a trained Brehon. And you were still learning at that stage. You were just competent enough to kind of actually, you know, go out and start doing work. Like the Brehons, they used to get paid whatever they passed in judgment. Like, say, like obviously everything was well codified. Like there's books and books of stuff. Like if someone steals a bit of honey off a table, like, you know, how much do they have to pay back and all this kind of crack. But the Brehon got a twelfth of it, you know, which was good wages, like, for sitting around just remembering stuff. Obviously, like, I remember most people were busting their holes in the fucking field like all day for the whole of their lives. But yeah, the only downside of being a Brehon then was that if you made a balls up, you had to pay the damages, which was a big problem, you know. But yeah, I suppose I kind of started rambling about the Brehons again. I was trying to stay away, but I'll tell you some interesting ones about that I find interesting about the Druids. They used to have this curse. It was called a flutter and wisp. I just love the name, like, and then in Irish, I can't remember the Dully Fulla or something, Dully Fulla. I don't know how to pronounce it, like. But the flutter and wisp, or the madman's wisp, was this curse that Druids used to cast. They used to pull a blade of grass off the ground, and then they'd like start chanting all this like hate into the blade of grass. And then whenever the person wasn't looking or didn't notice, the Druid would throw it in their face, like, and that was like to drive people fucking crazy, like, you know. Like, I think that's an interesting one. Like I suppose Dully, whatever, the Lee Fulla, it'd be like, you know, flying into madness would probably be like the closest kind of term in English, I suppose. Like, but it was invented by a guy called Fallon from Leinster. You know, it's amazing how all these like wee bits of facts, like, you know, have been preserved. Like, you know, but it probably would be like if you're sitting there like muttering under your breath under a fucking thing and then threw it in someone's face, they probably would go fucking mental at you, to be fair. Like, but like, even the like the madness, you know, like do you ever, like, what you call it, Bully of Sweeney, the madness of Sweeney, or the frenzy of Sweeney. He was famous enough, I'll admit, like, but basically there was this Sweeney fella. He was in battle, and like the bodies were piling high, like, and he was after insulting a monk, but just before the battle began, and basically he went fecking nuts, like. And the idea of this like flight into madness was that, like, whenever someone's hopping mad, like that, they're nearly like fucking taking, they're nearly flying, like, you know, they're jumping around like madmen, you know. Like, even the Vikings, even in their there's a book the Vikings wrote in 1250 or something like that, and they talk about this. They talk about the Gael, or the Gali as they call them, but that the Irishmen sometimes in battle, whenever it like was at fever pitch, you know, like people dropping left, right, and center, and all this kind of crack, that the Irishmen used to take off. And some of them, like, they used to hit madness, and they'd take off up the trees like squirrels, and they'd run around the country for 20 years. Like, they have this written down in their books, like that they'd be like crowing like birds, and like they'd be like you know, that feathers would start growing on them and all this kind of crack, you know. But that matches in kind of nearly with the frenzy of Sweeney, you know. He lived in a tree for fucking like 20 years after he went mental. But there's a place in Kerry called Glengalt, and that means the Glen of the Lunatics, and it was known for that because it was like it's like, this is the place where all the lunatics in the country gather if you leave them long enough, you know. Jeez. Then there's Tubernagalt is a place in like the well of the lunatics that they used to gather at, you know. There's actually another one in Donegal, just there at the entrance to Loch Foyle, down near the beach. There's a well as well up there, and that's the same. Like, that's where the lunatics used to gather, you know. And it was like kind of a curing well for the head cases, like. But or Brand Stream or something was the old name of it. I'm not even 100% sure. But there was let's see, the Druids. I'll get back to them again, I suppose. It was used to have this thing, the palm of the hand, it was called. And like, I'm taking all this off O'Curry nearly. Do you know, a lot of this is off O'Curry, so I would believe a lot of this stuff. I believe pretty much all of it, like that. It was definitely written down from Gaelic records, like, you know. Like, that's what kind of pisses me off about like history in school. They don't tell you none of this. Like, they just tell you, oh, this is what Julius Caesar said. It's like, fuck Julius Caesar. I want to hear what Mickey Mack said. You know, that kind of way. But there used to be a thing called Fair Fiera, and that was like a mist. Do you know, it was like whenever it was a St. Patrick, even like whenever he was approaching a king one day, he was transformed. The king kind of had this, you know, whatever it was, mystical cloak put over his eyes, you know, like a mist or whatever. And St. Patrick appeared as a deer. Him and his followers like appeared as deers to this king, like, and was able to walk straight up to him without being attacked, you know. But they used to, like, around fairy graves. That was that's the magic that's on a fairy grave that we're not able to see into the fairy world, you know. But it's like on Halloween every year that gets really thin, that veil, like, and that's why, you know, obviously we dress up as fucking pirates and put on wedding dresses and stuff for some kind of warped, perverse fucking tradition. But yeah, there was the palm of the hand prophecy was basically that. I see this now. Isn't it Maeve Irish? Oh. But sorry, I was just looking at the chat. But there was this here thing, palm of the hand prophecy, and what it used to be was that for divination. I'll talk a wee bit about divination first in general, and then I'll talk about the palm of the hand. There's different ways, like by birds calling. was one. The Druids used to listen, like, which kind of makes sense. Like, a lot of this stuff is actually based on practical application. Like, there's a lot of it's kind of like, well, I don't know about that or how they're doing that, but I can think of a fair few reasons for a lot of this stuff. Like divination by clouds, like you think red sky at night, shepherd's delight, red sky in the morning, shepherd's warning. That makes sense to me. Like, obviously, maybe if you're spending 50 generations plus and that's your core tenant, you might come up with a few, really, really, really good ones, like, or be able to tell something from that. Like, as an example, birds calling was another one. And the wren was seen as like a very important animal. The wren, like if its song was happy or sad, like, but they used to try and translate the wren song into language, like, so they'd be saying like, oh, that's the wren sounds like, it's going to rain tomorrow, or, these different kind of things, The raven, obviously, like, because you had the Morrigan, the 3-in-1, like the god of death, which is pretty fucking badass, really, like, tell you the truth, like the Táin is great for this stuff, like, because you have Phelim. Phelim is Maeve's prophetess, and she's like, I see crimson, I see red, and she's like, oh, but Maeve's like, oh, but what if I get better armor or whatever? And it's like, I see crimson, I see red. Brilliant. But water was another one, like how streams were running and stuff like that. People would have divined on that. Fire, and I find fire very interesting now, because there's a lot of overlap between, say, like Baal, like Baltana and May. Baal's fire. And Baal obviously is mentioned in the Bible as well as this kind of like, evil god or whatever. But it actually overlaps a bit with Zoroastrianism and stuff like that, which was basically what the Partholonians are supposedly have been. Like, they were kind of a weird sect of fire worshippers, like Crom Cruach as well. Like, they used to have this flame burning all the time on a place called, what you call that mountain in Cavan? Quilca Mountain. Well worth to visit now. It's a lovely place up there. But there used to be like one big gold statue and then 12 bronze statues around it. And there used to be a guy called Tiger Mass. And Tiger Mass basically just means like King Mass or whatever. But Crom Cruach on Halloween, like in the year, I think, like I can't even remember according to the annals, a long time ago anyway. A third of Ireland, or 2/3 of Ireland or whatever, were wiped out by this god Crom Cruach on top of this hill Quilca in Cavan, But I remember I was sitting with some very learned friends of mine one time, and we kind of came to the conclusion that Crom Cruach means like the third heaven or something like that. I have no idea how it came to that reasoning, but it seemed legit at the time, But the Druids used to use everything, like, there was sneezing. If someone sneezed, you could tell something about them, which would probably, like, because doctors at that time, physicians, like, would have been rolled up with the in the Druid class, or whatever the technical term was, the Corganach, as the Irish called them. With I'll probably just finish on this here, about 58 minutes in, but the divination of the palms, like, or, telling the future with your palms. What they used to do is used to chew a bit of red meat, like blood red meat, and they'd spit it up on a flagstone, and they'd say, oh, I'll be back tomorrow or whatever. And they used to come back, they used to sleep, they used to stay up all that night. And the next day they'd come back and they'd be like, tomorrow you're going to tell me what I need to know. And then he'd take the bit of meat that he had left out overnight, the raw meat that he had chewed up and left on a fucking stone outside, and then he'd eat it. And then he'd sit there and he'd put his head in his hands, and rest his elbows on the ground or on his knees or whatever. And he'd just sit there until he could divine what was going on, But it's Baal is Canaanite for Lord. Yeah, like, this is it. Like, sure. Oh, I could talk about this stuff for hours, like, but I suppose 1 hour tonight and then maybe another the next time. Beelzebub. Yeah, Beelzebub, Lord of the Flies. Yeah, Jesus, I was only getting going. I can't wait to actually go back through the chat here to see what you're talking about, but I might try and keep it. I don't know. I might go back, like early Christian, like St. Patrick's Church up from like say 450 or whatever to like the invasion of the Danes or something. Mightn't even actually manage to be able to fit that into an hour. Like it'd probably be like from like 450 to like 600 maybe I might fit in into a stream, like, But I'd like to talk about that at some stage, like, because I find that supremely interesting stuff, like, But it's just kind of like you need a bit of a, well, I would think anyway, like you need a bit of kind of background of where the Christian church in Ireland was coming out of, to get to the, how we fitted so well into the early church, like how did we have so many saints and scholars and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, I don't know. I'll see what the views end up like, and sure, if it's not a complete disaster, I might do a follow on and try and wrap a bit more Gaelic law into it, and tradition, whatever was done in the country and why it was done and who, like what you call them, Fallon inventing the fluttering wisp, Try to get some names. We'll put some names. If we can't get the faces, we'll put the names on these stories anyway. But yeah, I suppose thanks for listening in. Had a fairly steady audience there tonight, so mustn't have been too bad, and I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, I didn't even talk about politics in this here one, but sure, there's plenty of time for that, tell you the truth, like, because I'd like to know what happened myself, but we'll find out some other day, I suppose. All the best, folks. Have a good night.